just that you know what you're in for and not in for, and I'm not going to be in any way offended if you, as a result of that, leave. But hopefully, just to manage expectations. Okay, I'm not going to delve into the details of any specific discussion around science and religion. What we're going to be doing in this session, it's almost like we're going to take a step back, and we're going to be watching those discussions, and we're going to see what is actually happening in those discussions, because people often come to these conversations with very different understandings of how science and religion relate. So this is about 4 different ways that people understand the relationship between science and religion. Making sense? Okay, so just to start us off, this is the after lunch slot, so let's just get our brains into gear again. Just shout out from where you are, just some of the issues that you think are prevalent in this particular space. Okay, so science, religion, if you Google that, you get almost 1 billion hits. Now, even in Google terms, that's a lot. Okay, so it's a big issue. What makes this thing an issue? Why don't we just, what's the problem? Creationism. Okay, creationism versus usually versus evolution. So we sort of see the versus thing there. Okay, so our whole origins question is a big one. And that's one of the things that makes us wonder about the relationship between science and religion. Others, or is that the only one?
Theory of knowledge.
Say more, theory of knowledge?
In the sense that how you establish what is worth knowing, what not. So do you only go on facts, or do you actually go on history? Or so what is knowledge and what isn't?
Okay, and what are the various ways by which I can attain that knowledge as well? Okay, thank you. Wonderful. There was another hand that went again. 1, 2. Okay, I think you're saying a few things there. So you're asking the morality question, where both science and religion sometimes try and play. You're asking the existence of God question, but you're also asking the how can a good God allow this sort of world type of question. Okay, and they all play in that science-religion space. Thank you. Helen?
Dawkins and the God delusion, that God is not necessary in science.
Okay. So is God really necessary for us to explain anything at all?
Meta theory.
Say more?
Difference in the meta-theoretical work background of thinking.
Okay, so the differences in the, almost like some of the presuppositions we hold, some of the base assumptions, the foundations where we're coming from. Okay, okay.
But I do tell me, what's the difference, or what's truth? The theory of truth.
Okay, so it's similar to the theory of knowledge. Okay, so some of the ones you haven't mentioned, I think we mentioned the existence of God, also just the nature of mankind. Who are we really? Okay, science has something to say, religion has something to say. There's a potential debate there. Also about whether, the goodness of man or the badness of man. Okay, what are we? Also about the nature of humankind's problem. I think it's fairly uncontroversial to say that there is a problem, but we don't agree on what the problem is. We don't agree on the diagnosis, and therefore possibly don't agree on the remedy. So those sort of questions as well. And then also I think the whole question of free will. Okay, science says something, religion says something. The question of whether religion is just a sort of a brain state. Okay, is it something in our brains that makes us go religious? Okay, can you see, again, there's an interplay there. So I think the key thing to notice here is that on all the important issues, we actually have a sort of a science and religion type of a conversation. Okay, when it comes to our origins, when it comes to our destiny, when it comes to our identity, when it comes to what the problem is, what the solution is, we're having a science and religion type of conversation. Okay, so these conversations matter. Let me just because it's the after lunch slot, let me start us off with a movie clip. I need to set the scene first, Herman, before you get going. It's from a movie called Contact, which in the meantime is over a decade old, but it's a great movie, just sort of trying to explore the relationship between science and religion. And there are 2 main characters. So she, played by Jodie Foster, she's the science babe. Okay, and he, Matthew McConaughey, is the religion jock. Okay, and they have this thing for each other in the movie, and in the movie, obviously, their relationship to some extent symbolizes the relationship between science and religion. Now, what's happened here is they have got to know each other. They've lost contact with each other, and they run into each other again at this fairly snazzy function. And what's happened in the meantime is that he's written a book on science and religion, and he's got quite famous through writing that book, and we pick it up from there.
I got one for you.
What do you got?
Occam's Razor. You've ever heard of it?
Occam's Razor. It sounds like some slasher movie.
No, Occam's Razor. It's a basic scientific principle. And it says, all things being equal, the simplest explanation tends to be the right one.
Makes sense to me.
All right. So what's more likely? Thank you.
You're welcome.
That an all-powerful, mysterious God created the universe and then decided not to give any proof of his existence. Or that he simply doesn't exist at all. And that we created him so we wouldn't have to feel so small and alone.
I don't know. I couldn't imagine living in a world where God didn't exist. You know? I wouldn't want to.
How do you know you're not deluding yourself? I mean, for me, I need proof.
Proof. Did you love your father?
What?
Your dad, did you love him?
Yes, very much.
Prove it.
Okay, so can you see what he's doing here, right? She has a particular understanding of the relationship between science and religion, and he's basically through his question is actually taking her into a different paradigm almost, where he's basically saying, look, there are some things here that are important and that are true, but where science cannot necessarily go. Right, so can you see how he's sort of doing the paradigm shift thing with her in the way he's answering the question. So let's have a look at some of those. I've come up with 4 paradigms of how people can understand the relationship. I've read things where people come up with 3 or with 5. You might prefer a different set. You might prefer a combination. This is my set of 4 in the hope that it's helpful. And I think we've kind of answered the so what question, why we're doing this, right? So often in discussions that one has, we have people coming from different paradigms. And if we don't notice that, we actually totally miss each other. Okay, so being able to understand these different ways that people see the relationship between science and religion helps us in our conversation, helps us understand ourselves, like how do I see this thing, that helps us understand other people, and it obviously also helps us understand the realities that are being represented by science and religion as well. So hopefully it should be able to help us understand reality better as well. So let's have a look at each of those. The first one is the enemy's view. So there's science, there's religion, and they clash. And they're at war with each other. One of them has to budge. And as wars go, what often happens, of course, is that each party blames the other party for the war. So in this view, we would say there are 2 competing ways of determining truth, one scientific and the other one religious. And the only way to resolve the conflict is really to make severe compromises on the one side or the other. They play in the same space, they get in each other's way, they are enemies. And in the eyes of many, religion almost always comes off as second best. So in this slide, almost unintentionally, science won out. Lee Strobel, I'm quoting from one of the books that's available on the book tables over there. He has the following caricature for it. He says, "Science has put God out of a job. White-coated scientists of the modern world have trumped the black-robed priests of medieval times." Okay, so he's just giving us a caricature almost of that view. Now, in this enemy's view, it's almost like the war can be waged from both sides. So talk very briefly about each side. Science waging war. I think Louise had a very similar slide. Okay, we go to the usual suspects with that. Okay, so have a look at even just the bottom right there. There's a video by Richard Dawkins, or a series called "The Root of All Evil." And what is the root of all evil? It's religion. in his view. Okay, he says faith is indeed one of the world's greatest evils, comparable to the smallpox virus, but harder to eradicate. By the way, I'm sorry, I don't want to sort of make this a pick on Dawkins specifically section. I'm just sort of trying to whiz through these 4 paradigms. So I'm just going to give you 1 or 2 examples of each only, and he happens to be the guy that I picked. Here, have a look at that particular quote. Science shares with religion the claims that it answers deep questions about origins, the nature of life, and the cosmos. But there the resemblance ends. Scientific beliefs are supported by evidence, and they get results. Myths and faiths are not and do not. Okay, got it? So science are supported by evidence, science gets results, myths and faith is neither is applicable. So can you see there the sort of the view of there being a sort of a direct competition? Religion and science as direct competitors, they play in the same space. They both attempt to be total explanations, but in his view, again I'm quoting, religion is no longer a serious candidate in the field of explanation. It is completely superseded by science. Okay, very absolutist language there, completely. If science can't measure or offer it, it doesn't exist. So can you see that here, in that sort of view, he doesn't really seem to have room for the idea that science and religion are explaining different things at different levels. Okay, they're playing in the same space. They get in each other's way. They need to, one party needs to win out. One thing that might be worth pointing out in this thing is that often when the war gets waged from what looks like the science side, what if it's actually not from science but from what one might call scientism? So, whenever you add an ism, then it becomes your total worldview. It's not just one of the ways of establishing truth, it becomes the only way of establishing truth. So have a look at the difference between these 2 sentences. Okay, humans are a collection of molecules, and humans are nothing but a collection of molecules. Can you see the difference? Okay, now the first view is science. The second view is scientism. Why do I say that? Because the first view, that's, it goes with the evidence. You can test that, you can see that. The second view actually goes much further than the evidence allows. There's actually a bit of, there's a leap of faith involved in the second view. Okay, it's not actually science, it's scientism. So whenever we get into this enemies paradigm, just be aware of, are we talking science or are we talking scientism? I've talked about science waging war. The war can also sometimes be waged from the other side, from the religion side. And again, if I can just draw on Lee Strobel, he, I think before Lee became a Christian, he talked about him coming across a Christian who had this to say, I quote, "People have to choose between science and faith, between evolution and the Bible, between the 10 Commandments and make them up as you go ethics." Okay, can you see? So this particular Christian gave him the enemy's view of science and religion. You've got to choose one or the other, he says. Some other ways in which I think that sort of paradigm manifests itself is when, from the religion side, science is often, not often, but when science is discredited. So for example, we might say things like, science lacks objectivity, there's some impure motives involved there and hidden agendas and power plays and the like. I'm wondering whether that criticism is a fair one. Okay, yes, science can potentially have some of those problems, but so can religion. Okay, it's not a differentiator between science and religion. You can't just sort of, throw those bricks over the wall from the religion side to the science side. There's also one other way of discrediting science is possibly by saying, look, there's a lot of instability in science. Scientists keep changing their minds and their theories. And there again, yes, but doesn't that happen in religion as well? Okay, we theologians keep changing their minds as well. So I think we just need to be careful, again, with that enemies paradigm. One other thing about the enemies paradigm is, which is very important, I think, to deal with in this context, is this whole idea of God and the gaps. Okay, which I think most of you will be familiar with. So the idea of God of the gaps is, there's all of reality, and we can explain some of it with science, but there's so many things where we just stand before a mystery and we don't know how this thing works, and we say, you see, that's God. Okay, but then of course as science progresses, it gets to explain more and more things Okay, until if you take that to its logical conclusion, the space in which we can invoke God as an explanation, or in which we can invoke the existence of God, becomes smaller and smaller. Okay, so earthquakes, we used to wonder, what's that? Oh, that's got to be God at work. Now we know about plate tectonics. Okay, so now we no longer need God to explain earthquakes. Okay, so can you see if we hold the sort of the God of the gaps view, okay, which some people on the religion side do, you've got to be very careful, because the playground for God almost is becoming smaller and smaller if you hold that view. Okay, if God is only there where you cannot find another explanation, then we quickly got to bring in God. Okay, got it? So here's another way of potentially, and you would have maybe come across this too, of potentially wording that. We used to believe in fairies at the bottom of the garden, but now we've grown up, and what we've realized is that we don't actually need fairies to explain anything. Okay, so it's not so much that we've disproved the existence of fairies. We haven't. Okay, but the point is they've become irrelevant. We don't need them to explain anything, and then therefore we've stopped believing in them. It's a little bit of that Occam's razor thing that the Jodie Foster character mentioned in the video clip. Okay, so that was the first view. You can see I'm not also giving you a comprehensive critique, but I mean you've seen some elements of critique, and as we go on, I think we'd also you'll find more possible points of critique of this view. The second view is the view of master and slave. Okay, so they have science and religion have the relationship of science. It's usually that way around. I mean, we can chat about whether you also can see a paradigm where it's the other way around. But it's usually science is the master, religion is the slave. So what we have here is they are in relationship. It's a working relationship, but it's not a relationship of equals. Yeah, master-slave. So what we might say in this paradigm is we might say we seem to have evolved the tendency to be religious. Okay, it's popped out of the evolutionary process, and that's okay, that's fine. Okay, we don't have to fight against it in any way. What if religion is actually useful to help the preservation of the species? What if that's the reason it evolved? So religion is useful to have. Okay, got it? So it may not actually be true. The point is it's useful. Can you picture that view? So we're not against religion, because religion has all sorts of social value. It has all sorts of aesthetic value. Okay, religion gives us community. It gives us a sense of fulfillment. But when we talk about truth, we need to talk science, not religion. Okay, and so religion is subservient to science, and science will, to some extent, dictate to theology what its limits must be. Okay, so science tells religion where it's allowed to play. And perhaps we can even reshape religion a bit in order to align it with our modern scientific insights if necessary. Okay, so the key thing here is, religion may not be, we don't know if it's true, but that's not the main question. The main issue is that it's useful. And there's a fairly recent, we're talking a few months ago, example, and again, one can bring so many more examples. Please don't ask me to pronounce them, because I'm not sure whether to use it in the English or the French way. But his premise is, in the book Religion for Atheists, that it must be possible to remain a committed atheist and nevertheless find religion sporadically useful, interesting, and consoling. So religion, he says, can keep us from becoming individualistic. It can provide perspective. It makes us more empathetic and ethical. It creates community. It can help us cope with pain. There's all sorts of wonderful benefits of religion. And religions are giant machines for making ideas vivid and real in people's lives. Ideas about goodness and death and family and community. There is nothing like this in the secular world. Okay, isn't that interesting? Okay, so you can see here, what you see there is there's an acknowledgement that religion can go to some extent where science, or where atheism in his case, cannot go. Religion may be misguided, but it's still useful as a kind of social glue, something that gives us continuity, something that holds us together. But now, again, I'm not giving you a comprehensive critique, but I mean, to talk about something as being useful without talking about it being true, to commend the benefits of religion without talking about truth is a little bit like commending the benefits of marriage without a spouse. Okay, or of the benefits of music with no sound. I mean, you can't really go there. Okay, one other example I have for us. Less than an hour's drive down the road. Who's been to Maropeng? Okay, not so many people actually. Okay, so Moropang, for those of you who've been there, basically tells a story, right? It tells the story of our evolution, and it's in many ways symbolized by its entrance and its exit. So you enter in this sort of this grassy, undeveloped a type of a setup, and then inside you get to see the story of how we evolved to be much more complex and perhaps even technological beings, and then you exit on the other side, and it looks all technological and modernistic, and it sort of tries to show where it is that we've come. It's trying to symbolize the progress that the evolutionary process has brought us. And I know that when they were still in the implementation phase of this thing, that one of the things that they identified, I mean, they already had a lot of it sort of at least planned, and they suddenly realized, no, whoa, we're missing one thing. What about this whole question about science and religion? So they identified that as a gap. Okay. Now here's how they filled the gap. They then basically now have a part in the story where they say, isn't it wonderful how we've evolved the capability to be religious? Okay, got it? Part of becoming more complex beings is the ability to think about transcendence and to think about meaning and to think about spirituality and religion. Now, can you see what's happening here? Okay, can you see how they are spectacularly missing anybody that might be in the enemy's paradigm? Okay. Somebody in the enemy's paradigm would say, look, hey, you need to question the whole story. Okay, and all you've done is you've just added some flavor to your story. Okay, can you see how, from that paradigm you would totally miss somebody in another paradigm? It strikes one almost like a little bit of a cop-out. Okay, but that's it is because they are they've chosen the master-slave paradigm, and in that model we embrace religion as necessary to society, but we wouldn't really ask the question whether religion is true. The point is, it's useful. Okay, with me so far? Let's move on. Third paradigm, if we get there, is the view that science and religion are strangers. Okay, they live in totally different places, and they don't have a relationship, but they also happily leave each other alone. Okay, so science and religion are both valid, but they apply to totally different realms. Perhaps we could say science is about the natural and theology about the supernatural. Often the way it's worded is science is about the how and maybe the what, and religion is about the why. So, for example, when we look at a kettle boiling, I can look at it at the level of science and make all sorts of how and what type of analyses of what's happening in that process. But I'm not, by doing that, I haven't answered the why question. Okay, why is the kettle boiling? Well, because I want to make a cup of tea. All right, so I can analyze the cake, but why did Auntie Matilda bake it? Okay, can you see the difference between the two levels? Often what we also, other terminology used here often is the terminology of mechanism versus meaning. Okay, mechanism, the how, the what, meaning being the why. And in this paradigm, if I can just apply it to one example area, if we have a look at the Genesis account, we would say that Genesis is a whodunit, not a howdunit. Okay, Genesis is not a science textbook, but God's love letter to us. Okay, it's a song of creation. The genre, actually, of Genesis 1 can very, very easily be seen. By the way, I agree with that part. Okay, can very easily be seen as poetic, as a song. Okay, it's not necessarily a science treatise. Just a few other snippets out of this. You remember the quote from Galileo? Science tells you how the heavens go, and the Bible tells you how to go to heaven. Okay, can you see? Playing in totally different domains. There's the famous cosmologist Stephen Hawking was reportedly invited by the Pope, this would be the previous Pope, not the current Pope, to explain the Big Bang and black holes to him. And after he was finished, the Pope reportedly said, "From the Big Bang to black holes is your territory, outside of that is my territory." Okay? Different territories. So religion is not the enemy of science, it's valuable, it's a necessary counterpart, and religion is not subservient to or redefined by science, it's an equal, it's in a separate and autonomous domain. And where the two do end up fighting, it's because they've tried to step on each other's turf. You know, if they just each stay on their side of the line, everything will be happy. So, for example, you know, if you want to start developing an ethic based on evolutionary theory, well, that's science overstepping its line. Or if you want to develop a science based on Genesis, well, that's religion overstepping its line. So in this view, you'd say, look, just don't overstep the turf. Now, the problem, one of the critiques of this view would be, yeah, but who decides where the line is? Okay, so if you think of the whole debate around intelligent design, for example, okay, intelligent design people come and say, yeah, but what if this looks designed? As soon as they say that, somebody red cards them and says, oh, now you're bringing religion in. Okay, whereas the other side would say, no, we're talking about science here. You know, does science give evidence of design? So where are we here now? You know, who's overstepping whose turf? Can you see it's not always that straightforward? But I do think this view is partially correct. I do think that the Bible was never intended as a detailed scientific textbook, and we shouldn't read it as such. And I do think science cannot and never will be able to answer questions of meaning, and we shouldn't expect it to. And that's not a flaw of science. It's just, it's outside of its scope. So science and religion do have different objects of interest and focus. The nature of the Trinity, the mass of an electron. You know, do you see the difference? Can you see its different turfs? So there is certainly something to that view, but there is a little bit of a but to it. And I think the but is that there are touch points, or there are points of intersection that you cannot totally separate them. So, for example, the Bible does make some claims about facts, okay, not just about meaning. Right? It makes claims about facts. So, I don't know, a flood, for example. And so it's not just about morality and faith. And so you will have places of intersection. And if you want to then hold this particular stranger's view, then the only way to uphold that view is to almost like to subtract from the claims of the one or the other. And so there may be some religions that can fit with this total separation principle. But Christianity cannot. According to the Bible, God has revealed himself in time and in space. And so the Bible will intersect some of the factual claims of science and history. And at such touch points, there will be either conflict and agreement. Okay, so while much of science and religion, I'm often specifically talking about biblical religion, while they're concerned with different things, there's clearly some overlapping territory. And where that happens, either they agree or they disagree. We got to, it's not as simple as trying to keep them separate. There's another issue with regard to the keeping them separate debate, and this is this one. So I just found this a good wording, even if it was just just somebody blogging essentially. Okay, but have a look at this. Somebody says, can a scientist in his laboratory perform an experiment demonstrating that there are no witches? No. Can he deduce that conclusion from quantum mechanics, relativity, or the theory of evolution? No. Must we acknowledge, therefore, that belief in witches is intellectually respectable? Again, no. Advocates of the science cannot disprove gambit seem to be unaware that they are opening the door to unwelcome guests. Witches are only one example. Don't forget the tooth fairy. Okay, so can you see what this person's reacting against? They're reacting against the stranger's view. Okay, they're sort of saying, yes, but as soon as you take sort of religion totally over here and exempt it from any rational scrutiny, how are you ever going to keep the crazies out? Okay, we have no way of keeping the crazies out if we say religion is beyond rational scrutiny. And I think that's a very, very valid point. And it's one of the critiques against this total separation view. So then just in summary, where we've gone so far is that well, just read it. I think, let me just go through the right-hand side there, just in terms of its effect on religion. So I think the enemy's view tends to render religion non-existent because it's this God of the gaps thing. God just gets squeezed out of the explanations for reality. Master-slave does tend to render religion inferior, okay, because now we don't really, beliefs aren't really true. They might be useful, but it's tends to render religion inferior, and the stranger's view tends to render religion irrelevant because now it's over there, but real life happens over here. The real facts and the real scientific analysis happens over there. So, fourth view, and the recommended view being that of science and religion being siblings, okay, being a little bit like brother and sister. I was thinking of using the word friends, but I went for the word siblings. So what we're talking about here is that they are, I mean, they have different territories, but those territories do overlap to some extent. Or if you don't like the overlap analogy, then talk about touch points. Okay, there are points at which they do touch. You cannot keep them totally separate. They have different but sometimes overlapping interests. They are related. They squabble a bit on occasions, like siblings do, but on the whole they get along. Okay, they believe it's resolvable. They have the same father. Okay, so just to try and sort of illustrate that a little bit, Francis Bacon said God has written two books: the book of his word and the book of his works. Okay, so they are both originating from the same source. But now the problem is, of course, that they stand in some they've got to stand in some relationship because they have the same origin. The trouble is we as humans are trying to look at this thing, and one thing I think we need to then be aware of is that sometimes these two don't seem to match. Okay, the two stories don't seem to match, but some of the possible reasons for that might be, if one just continues using this diagram, is perhaps there's something limited in our ability to connect with the Word. Maybe there's something limited in our ability to understand the world in which we live in, and maybe there's something just about us in general. Okay, so we need to understand the limits of our ability to know. We need to understand also that we're creatures with mixed motives and vested interests and prior commitments, and we're not always characterized by 100% honest pursuit of truth, and we need to be honest with ourselves about this. Okay, and I think any paradigm that does not account for this isn't entirely honest. So we also need to almost like just look at almost like the problem of the human heart, as well as the problem of then human ability to know. So if the two sometimes don't seem to match, it may be because of some degree of distortion in our connection with either or both, or something within ourselves. There's a wonderful quote by Sir William Bragg. I'm going to read that to you because it's just a nice and positive expression of this sibling view. Sometimes people ask if religion and science are not opposed to one another. They are, in the sense that the thumb and fingers of my hand are opposed to one another. It's an opposition by means of which anything can be grasped. Okay, I just think that's a great quote. Before I get to what's behind me. So we need to, I think, acknowledge that there are particular touch points or places in which there is some overlap. And if we were to do a brainstorm, I think we'd come up with all sorts of examples of that. But let me just give you two or three. Creation should give some pointers to the Creator, right? So if what we have here isn't just the result of a purposeless, indifferent process, we should be able to see some evidence of a creator in it, as indeed we do. So it's a little bit like a novel might provide some clues about its author, or the wardrobe might contain some clues about the cabinet maker. Okay, I mentioned the flood. I mean, that would be one example. Okay, do we see evidence of a flood? Whether there's some debate even within religion: should it be local? Should it be global? But we would expect to see some evidences, as indeed we do. The person and work of Jesus, his birth, his life, his death and resurrection, this happened in space, in time. We would expect to be able to find evidence of that, as indeed we do. Okay, so there are so many touch points. The whole creation versus evolution thing. Okay, I mean, we cannot. In the stranger's view, we would just say, yeah, but if God created through evolution, well, that's, what's wrong with that? That's his business. That's the how. Who are we to dictate to God how he created? But it's not quite as simple as that, right? Because we need to then grapple with the fact, for example, that if God created through evolution, he created through a process that involves death. Okay, so there's a little bit of, the goodness of God at stake here. Okay, and we do need to grapple with that. Now I have seen people answer that with a lot of integrity. It can be done. What I'm saying is you got to wrestle with it. You can't just ignore it. You can't just keep the two separate. Okay, you need to then sort of bring together. There's an account in the Bible of Adam and Eve as real people, and of there being a particular event in time in which they fell into sin, in which they rebelled against God, in which their relationship with God was distorted. If we say, God created through evolution, what do we do with that? Okay, do we still hold that there is a particular point in time at which this happened? If we don't, then what is it that Jesus came and saved us from? Okay, can you see how, so even as we play in that space, we need to be careful not even just that we don't mess up our Christology on the other side. So again, I think, some of these questions can be answered, and I've seen them answered with integrity. The point is we need to grapple with them. Okay, we can't just say they're totally separate. And then to this point is also just to realize that science and religion are, to some extent, in flux. Okay, so science has progressed a lot, and it continues to progress. J.P. Moreland says, the history of science is full of cases where science has changed its views and reformed former theories. Scientists themselves are reluctant to say that current science will resemble science 200 years from now. Thus, even if science conflicts with theology at some point, that doesn't necessarily mean that theology requires adjustment. Okay, so even if you think about the fact that the universe had a beginning, okay, now that's a fairly recent idea. That's a 20th century idea. So the guys in the 19th century, did they feel that they had to adjust their religion to be consistent with the scientific explanation of the time that the universe was eternal? It's a good thing that they didn't adjust, because it turns out that science evolved in that particular case. Science came to better insights. And then it's the same with religion. Okay, I mean, we 200 years ago we still used religion to justify slavery. There might be some things that we haven't 100% grasped right, or there might be a different blind spot that we have right now. We need to be open to that possibility. So where science and religion seem to sort of not gel very nicely today, one of the ways to deal with it is just to say, look, let's just relax a little bit. Let's see what happens tomorrow. Maybe the one or the other has taken us to new insights. So just as science seeks to continuously improve the understanding of an unchanging world, theology must seek to continuously improve its understanding of the unchanging word. Okay, so can you see I'm not sort of pulling a relativism stunt on you. I'm not saying the word is changing or that the realities represented by science are changing. I'm just saying our understanding of it can potentially move on. And I think at this point, is this where we get to, yeah. If Herman, if you can play the other movie clip. This is actually, before you play it again, stop. This is a bit of a spoiler, so if you're still sort of trying to dig that one out, then please don't listen for the next 30 seconds. This is towards the end, and now what's happened is that she has met aliens. Okay, but ironically, very ironically, she can't prove it. Okay, so the very proof that she asked for from other people is now the very proof she herself cannot give. And she's just been before this, whatever, commission of inquiry, and they have absolutely shredded her, okay, for lack of her ability to prove. And she's obviously very distraught about that. She's now exited that building, and outside she finds that she's got a lot of supporters. So a lot of the people in the general population believe her, and a lot of people in the general population see her as their hero. So Herman, if I can ask you to press play.
Joss, what do you believe? What do you believe? As a person of faith, I'm bound by a different covenant than Dr. Airway. But our goal is one and the same. The pursuit of truth. I, for one, believe her.
Okay, so can you see, I mean, to some extent, I mean, I'm cheating slightly. The movie doesn't quite go to the siblings' view, but you can see it's close. Okay? He talks about there are different domains, but the goal is one and the same. There's a common goal here, which is the pursuit of truth. It's what science tries to do. It's what religion tries to do. And you then also have that symbolic value of them holding hands, right? Which is in many ways trying to then show what the movie makers or what the author, which is interestingly Carl Sagan, is trying to show you that the two can hold hands. So science and religion can and do get along as siblings. They have different but sometimes overlapping interests. Due to their limited insights, they don't always agree, but they do believe the issues are resolvable. And because they have the same father, they do get along and they work towards resolving their differences. Okay, God has authored 2 books: Nature, the book of his works; Scripture, the book of his words. And if I can just throw it out there, it's quite possible that both of these books point to God and invite us to worship him. Now, before I open it to questions, I thought it would be good just to go through some practical examples. Okay, so I'm just going to throw a few slides, and you just tell me which of the 4 paradigms you think we're looking at, which of the 4 understandings we are looking at. Now, some of these might not be clearly in the one or the other. That's fine. Let's just see how we go. It's really just to firm up what we've just talked about. Okay, let's start with an easy one. All right, science flies you to the moon. Religion flies you into buildings. What paradigm are we talking about? Enemies. Okay, that's a pretty clear one. And notice, by the way, how how it's certainly not a fair comparison, because it compares the very, very best of science with the very, very worst of religion. It's not a fair comparison. You could also bring the worst of science, I don't know, show some gas chamber stuff or something, with the best of religion. Okay, that was an easy one. Let's keep going. From a Nobel Prize winner, science says nothing about intelligent design, and intelligent design brings nothing to science and should be taught in theology, not science classes. Okay, I hear strangers. What else? I think he's sort of trying to enforce the stranger's view, like religions stay out of science turf. If you're talking about intelligent design, you're stepping on my turf. Okay, many possibilities, but here, One Time magazine talking about the God gene. Does our DNA compel us to seek a higher power? Believe it or not, some scientists say yes. Okay, the one I'm hearing most frequently is master-slave. I would agree with that. Okay, so science is giving us an explanation for why we're religious. Right? Okay, next one. And this is a fairly famous one, but it's still pretty cool. When the first man in space sort of came back and sort of felt he had to toe the party line and said something to this effect: I do not see any God up here, when he came back from as the first human being in space. Now, what view or what paradigm is he from? Okay, he goes into space, he comes back, he says, I didn't find any God. Yeah, I think that's the enemy's one. I mean, one of the obvious answers to him is, what were you expecting to find? Angels flapping wings. So it's a little bit like saying, there is no cabinet maker because I couldn't find him anywhere in the wardrobe. Okay. Is evolution true? It's hard to say, and it does not really matter. We do not and cannot dictate how God has worked. By the way, I really respect this lady, so I put that one on with a little bit of trepidation. What view? Okay, it looks like a little bit of a stranger's view, yeah? So, I mean, we can, if we're talking religion, we're not going to talk about the mechanisms by which we originated. Okay, that's outside of our space. I missed one. Okay, the God helmet. Do you remember the God helmet? What they basically did is they measured some of the brain functions of people, like, for example, Buddhist monks in meditation, and they they did the scan and they checked which areas of the brain were active in that meditation. And then they said, what happens if we actually turn this thing around? Why don't we stimulate those areas of the brain and then see what people experience? Okay, so they put the God helmets on people, and then they stimulate those areas of the brain, and then people say, oh man, this was quite an experience. I've had this sense of presence. I've had this sense of other. Okay, what paradigm are the people probably from that made the God helmet? Probably, yeah, it could well be master-slave. But now, I think one of the things we can illustrate with that one is, again, depending on which paradigm you come from, you may well see the results differently. Okay, so for example, if you're in a more of an enemies paradigm, you will say, okay, you see, religion is just a brain state, God doesn't exist. Right? We've squeezed them out now. Whereas if you come from maybe a sibling's view, you might say, oh no, this is fantastic. You guys have found the antenna by which we tune into God. Okay. Or you might say in a third paradigm, I'm not sure which, you might say, well look, that's very interesting, but you've proved absolutely nothing. Okay, because now think about if you were able to stimulate the eye to see things that are not really there, what have you proved about what's really there? Nothing. Okay, you've just proved that you can mess with the senses. That's all. Okay, so can you see how depending on which paradigm you come from, you will see this experiment very, very differently. More obvious one, God versus science. There's a versus in there, that's a clue. Okay, enemy's view. I'm going to skip over, I'm going to skip over one or two just for the lack of time. This one intrigued me. Religion, internal truth. Science, external truth. Okay, where are we going? Probably. Okay, I would probably go with siblings more with strangers simply because there seems to be an attempt to separate internal and external, to draw a sort of a turf line, and to say science one side, religion the other side. And again, you can see that there's immediately some problems with that. Okay, religion it's certainly not Christianity. Okay, it's certainly not just about internal truth. It's about the universe, not just about what's swirling around in my head or heart. Okay. Here's a nice cartoon. Let's end the divisive science versus religion argument. Here, we should figure out how to unite the two ideas. Let's imagine that religion is a square block of wood. Ooh, and science can be this round hole. Now what? Okay, that's probably another stranger's view, isn't it? Okay, and why is this not continuing sometimes? Okay, this should be just the last one, a fairly obvious one again. So you get all sorts of cool things when you Google image search on science and religion. Okay, I do have one other little clip that I can possibly show you in the last few minutes, but do you want to throw some things at me? Do I need to pass this on?
I'll just talk like this.
Okay.
You want to record it? Sorry? You want to record it?
I just want to make a remark. God created the universe. Science is a study of how He did it, why He did it. If the two don't concur, it's either because the scientist is not complete yet, or he made a mistake. That's one thing. The other side, maybe he misinterpreted the Word of God. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm a little bit uncomfortable with the idea of religion, because I think everybody in the world is religious. Everybody has that capacity. Even Dawkins, I think he's a staunch religious person. But we can't take religion and compare it with faith and theology as the same type of thing. So to me, as a Christian believer, faith is a relationship. And only through that relationship I can view the whole world and everything. And I can be a scientist as well. But that's a relationship as a basis. And I'm a bit worried about this comparison when you use the word religion there. I'm not sure, but I don't feel comfortable.
Yeah, I'm with you. And I think I can take that criticism just like that. One thing I was avoiding was also detailed definitions of those terms. And you can see what I did is I spanned the spectrum. Sometimes I use religion very widely as any appreciation of the transcendent, and sometimes I zoomed in specifically onto biblical Christianity. But again, I think it depends on which particular discussion you're having. Okay, are you having the wide discussion or the more narrow discussion? And I think a lot of what I'm saying should apply here and there. And where it only applied on the Christianity side, I think I was hopefully reasonably clear that it did. Okay, but thank you.
I was just wondering what you think about awards for Christian Science, and whether maybe that can be viewed as a propaganda type mechanism to fund a particular field of science for ulterior motives. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. What in all the world is Christian Science? It's one of those, if you put Christian as an adjective in front of something, what is that meant to do? When is science Christian and when is it unchristian? So I would probably have some questions about what it is that's meant, and whether it's possible to have this thing. Okay, so surely if science is the pursuit of truth, and if it's true that all truth is God's truth, then then all science well done is in some ways, I wouldn't call it Christian, but I mean it's then good science. I'm kind of talking past you a little bit. Do you want to add to it?
I just want to say, if you're interested in Christian Science, you're in the wrong room, because Christian Science is a cult. Speaking of cults in the next room, but if you're talking about science practiced by Christians, you might be in the right room. Last question.
Yeah, I still want the last 2 minutes as well. Yeah.
It's not a question. I think there's just a difference. Christian Science is a cult, but there is Christian way of doing science, and even the result of that in the science. So I think that's another discussion that I really want to discuss, but I don't think it's for now.
But again, if it's, to me the basic question is, are we talking about good science or not? Because if we are talking about, if we aren't talking about good science, then let's leave it one side. If we are talking about good science, let's bring that into the mainstream scientific discussion, rather than sort of do a thing on the side. But anyway.
I don't want to debate it now, but if you look at economics from a Christian viewpoint, you come with something else. If you, for instance, come from a monastic or pragmatic sort of viewpoint. So they.
Yes. Okay. So I think what you point. No, how much time have we got? What we're pointing to is it's one of the places for lack of time didn't go now. Is that we need to be aware. Actually, let me just try and find that slide. Come on. This slide is wrong. Okay, it's not like on the science side we use reason, and on the religion side or theology side we use faith. And what I think is a better or a more accurate view is this: that we come with our particular presuppositions, with our assumptions, with our worldviews, and we come with those to science and to theology. And there's faith and reason involved in both. Okay, the reason I avoided the slide is it probably takes a little bit more time to actually motivate the details of that. But I think does that sort of play towards where you're trying to go? Okay, thank you. Yeah. Okay, so that's a key one. I just wanted to. Have I got 2 minutes? Can I play us
There's another question.
Go for it.
What about the viewpoint that there is an absolute truth, or all truth is God's truth, and that humans have an inherent need to worship a deity or to have a deity, as well as a need to discover truth, and that when those two are blurred or incorrectly done, we've been given reason, the ability to reason and to think rationally, so that we can serve all of those needs. And what if the whole concept of science and religion, perhaps, what if you divorce religion from Christian faith? I think religion represents sort of what's evolved from those two needs, and there's not necessarily any kind of holistic explanation or any kind of valid viewpoint to explain everything. It's simply the evolution of one of those two needs. It doesn't represent any sort of search for absolute truth. It becomes using the search for curiosity to serve an agenda or a need.
Yeah. Okay. So if I've it's not fair to try and talk to try and answer in 30 seconds, but I think that a lot of what you said, I think very much fits within the sibling view of that. But what we need to differentiate, and again, I've just taken the slide away again in answer to your question, is that you can do good science, you can do bad science, you can do good religion, you can do bad religion. But if both of them are done well, surely then they should be able to dovetail. But both of them can go funny as well. And one of the things that you've described was religion going funny. Am I kind of hitting you?
Also science going funny as well, because
yes.
People like Dawkins and Hitchens, they claim to be scientists, and some aspects of what they do are scientific. But in reality, all they're really doing is pursuing their own agenda,
Yes.
There's this popular viewpoint that if it's scientific, it must be empirically correct or true, or
Yes.
must have some degree of truth. I remember talking to a friend who's a scientist, who's completely agnostic. He said you can make a God say whatever you wanted to say.
Okay, and then I would bring back that slide that I had just now about the, you come to this thing with your particular presuppositions, and if you come with the wrong presuppositions, you can turn science into scientism, for example, which is the phenomenon that you're describing. Okay, I wanted to play. May I? I wanted to play you the last sort of it's a very short clip, but it's just a little sort of thought about what this touch point theory, okay, the siblings theory might look like. What's happening here is that this is the point where the two characters meet for the first time. Okay, and she works for SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, but she's kind of embarrassed about telling people that she's searching for little green men in outer space. So now notice how she answers his question, and then notice how he answers her question.
What are you studying?
Well, the usual. Nebulae, quasars, pulsars, stuff like that. What are you writing?
The usual. Nouns, adverbs, adjectives here and there.
Okay, so bring me back to the slides. So you can see, I mean, he's basically showing her exactly what he's showing her up for what she's doing. She's giving a particular explanation at a particular level, but that's not the level of explanation that he was looking for. He was looking for an explanation at a different level. Now here's the thing, okay, you can find a complete explanation at those lower levels, okay, so there is nothing about what he's writing that you cannot explain with noun, adjective, adverb, etc., right? There's nothing that you can offer a complete explanation. There's no God in the gaps there anyway, and so there's no, you've got it all worked out at that level, okay, but you cannot say that that is the only level at which truth exists. Okay, so if that is the level at which you're functioning, you are missing the point entirely and spectacularly. Okay, so just to illustrate that, and I do need to close, you have different levels of explanation. Why is the ball moving? Okay, the ball might be moving because of forces acting on it. Okay, and there is nothing about the movement of the ball that you cannot explain through the forces acting on it. Correct? You have a complete explanation at that level. But you can also say the ball moves because someone kicks it. Okay, can you see I've sort of moved up a little bit into a different level of explanation. I've almost like introduced a little bit of personal explanation there. Or the ball is moving because South Africa is playing Argentina. Okay, can you see if you just give the explanation at the level of forces, you are missing the point. Okay, you've got a complete explanation, but you are missing so much about what reality is about. Okay, so there's just one concluding thought on what this touch point thing might look like. Okay, there are different levels, and the levels are related. Okay, but so you can see there's difference and touch points in that. Different levels. The levels are related, but you can't just stay stuck at the levels at the bottom. I think I had one more. So if we look at a human being, you have you can study the human being at different levels. Don't only stick to the bottom one. Thank you.